Hello and welcome to RealmCast from Minor Realm Games. You heard right, people. We've acquired the proper level and are now on the main quest line. This podcast is all about the world of tabletop RPGs. I'm Alex and this is Bill. Today we're going to be discussing tips and tricks for you to implement at your game tables. Hey Bill, how's that party loot coming along for us?
We have acquired a significant amount of loot. We have leveled up several times, and we couldn't have done it without our listeners' help. So thank you all so much for your support on Twitch, twitch.tv/Minor Realm Games. You can find us there every single week doing some nonsense like Artifice AG, the space campaign, our new Starfinder series. We'll be doing episode 3 this Tuesday. I guess by the time this episode drops, it'll be Tuesday the 18th, Tuesday the 25th, and every Tuesday there on after. So thank you for checking that out. We are amidst a Kickstarter launch. So our very first Kickstarter for Minor Realm Games' first original module, Clock Strike Zero, which to date, as I record this episode, is over 70% funded in its first week.
That's awesome.
I'm just really excited about that. We have lots of things coming in the down the pipeline for you all regarding Clock Strike Zero, including the merchandise, of course, the module. And if we break, Alex, if we break this initial $4,000 milestone to get the project backed, we're going to have a lot of really exciting stretch goals that we're announcing as well. So
I cannot wait. I am so pumped up about it. Just for our listeners, so you know, Bill doesn't tell me about a lot of the stretch goals and stuff. So when they get released, I will be just as surprised as the rest of you. So really excited to see what they are when they come out. So hit up the Kickstarter and make sure you support this awesome program.
Yeah, I'll throw the Kickstarter in the show notes for YouTube and Spotify for the next few weeks at least. You guys, you've done an amazing job spreading the word, evangelizing Minor Realm Games. We are sort of a new and fledgling company, and we dearly, dearly appreciate that. If you want updates on all things Minor Realm Games, whether it be this podcast dropping, RealmCast, any of our Twitch broadcast games, events, and of course projects and merchandise. You can also check out www.minorrealmgames.com, which is dropping this week. And follow us over on Twitter, all things at Minor Realm Games. Cool. So, Alex, I know we have a jam-packed program today. I saw the format is just... wow. I mean, you've just really fleshed this one out. So let's just go ahead and jump into it, yeah?
All right. So in our world, in our tabletop RPGs, whatever system you're playing, our players cannot be the only people that live in this world. It's just unreasonable that just the players and the monsters that come around there. But so how do we make NPCs to be meaningful and less likely for our players to end up being murder hobos in our world?
It's a good question. I talk about this a lot. If you've seen any of my like webinar content, that sort of stuff, I focus a significant amount of my time on the importance of credible, valid, important NPCs, because NPCs, in my opinion, are there to authenticate and fulfill your world and provide that sense of depth and immersion for your game. What do I mean by all that mumbo jumbo? Well, NPCs have to feel important. We can't make them important. They have to feel important. So we need to give them a certain amount of detail and a level of description that's not just in what they're wearing, maybe what species or race or background they are, and from there, but sort of those soft skill things, right? Those the emotional sort of and the mannerisms and the sort of perspective of somebody that you get from just your senses, right? You're not just your perception of them physically, right? And I do that in a way of just sort of evoking some emotion from the actual players at the table, making them sort of try to feel something about this particular character before they even engage in conversation, but more specifically, if there is dialogue to be had after that, right? So you want to sort of continue describing maybe what this character is doing. Maybe they're looking around the room very nervously and cautiously, or perhaps maybe they're very engaged and they're staring through your eyes like they're two big pools, and you're sort of wondering why their eyebrows are sort of arched and raised, and with an inquisitive yet intrigued and delighted expression upon their face, right? So those types of things will get the players thinking, and they'll engage their characters in a more authentic manner as well as a response. And that sort of mirroring and that tone matching and that level of immersion can make for some really great gameplay. I think the other piece of the NPCs that I think of, aside from that sort of emotional and manneristic behavioral type of stuff that creates some depth and development in them, is just sort of the when and where, and deciding as a GM very consciously whenever you drop and slot these NPCs into place, to what level of depth or importance did you want this NPC to have? But be prepared to flex sort of that scale at any given moment. Sometimes you're, let's call it a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being sort of they're in the background just as extras to fill out the cafe, and 5 being they're going to be a leading role and maybe even accompany the party for a couple of sessions, that sort of thing. If you have somebody that you draft up as an NPC that maybe looks more like a 2 or 3, be prepared that they get bypassed, or be prepared for them to maybe take on a more important role. Always give them a couple of extra bullet points, whether it's something that they might know about the world or something that might help the party along within their adventure or the structure of the game, or even just something fun and quirky and memorable that'll stick with your players.
I like that. I like the so something I've done in my experiences is I will take a person that I know in the real world and apply their mannerisms and cadence and their persona into a non-player character. It helps me make that connection, and it allows me. It's easier for me at that point in time to create goals and kind of flesh them out. And this is obviously for a non-player character, an NPC that is higher on that scale of 1 to 5, like a 4 or a 5. So where otherwise I'm kind of just you made a good point with creating deeper bullets for NPCs that might only give you, like, your players might want that person to be along, and you're like, oh no, that's Johnson McJohnson doesn't go on adventuring. He just he's not interested in what you've got to sell. So,
well, yeah, you look at Gary in the world of Greyhawk, right? Some of the most memorable NPCs in the world of Greyhawk were all Gary's friends from around the table. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's a great point to mention, Alex, is that you don't need to create characters from nothing. And in fact, nobody does, right? We all have reference implementations and points of importance. And we certainly have characteristics that we've observed in other characters, perhaps we've seen in games, right? I've recycled sort of this friendly old gnome that we see in Clock Strike Zero over a series of campaigns over multiple years, right? And it just took him to take this form of this character is now the form that we know that's going to be released, right? And that was in the broadcast. But like, that character's sort of always been around in my head for a long time. This sort of the old kook, the tropey old kook that hates adventures, but definitely has a story to tell, right? It had a lot of adventures behind them. So
yeah, he made it. The gnome made an appearance in the game that you ran around the table for us. So Fob Blackwell there, shout outs to him.
Exactly right. So like, yeah, I've had a version of that character in my head for 5 years, and it was kind of like, we need to give him some purpose, and have him do some things that are a little more interesting, right? So.
Absolutely. So one of our players shows up, has this character, and it is nothing like you expected. For example, you have an insane half-elf sorcerer who thinks he's a halfling, or a blind Aasimar dwarf with stone skin and mithril hair. How do we take those characters and link them to the world that we've created? Like, where do we go from there?
Yeah, I think that this is a judgment call, clearly a conscious decision that you'll need to make as a GM of whether or not you want these particular character builds, the structure of that, to fit within the mold of the world that you're building out. And then that goes to say whether it's something modular or pre-published that you're running, or something from scratch, of course. But you can certainly scale up, scale down, and modify anything within any world at any time to fit these characters in. It really just depends on if you think that would be helpful or additive to buttress the storyline and the story arc and the gameplay, right? Does it make sense for there to be sort of this Esmarian dwarven sort of populace in the kind of Western world, and this is like an Eastern frontier sort of campaign, right? And everybody sort of migrated across this, realm over time for these, XYZ compelling events, right? Or, they've found themselves, these particular characters that aren't much anything like the other characters in the world that, or the environment that you've had in mind or that you've started to sketch out. Let's think of the plot hooks that we could place into the story to explain how or why these characters might have found themselves here in this other world that's quite unfamiliar to them, and make it more accessible and approachable by giving them purpose here. Right. So just think about what makes it meaningful. Right. I think that the part of the linking characters to the world discussion, we need to just consider hey, our players take a lot of stock and they invest in these characters, and let's figure out a way to find some importance or relevance for them, or at the very least, ask them some questions that get them thinking a little bit more about how they can help you tie that character to the world.
I like that. So those are two characters that showed up in the campaign that I run on Roll20, and they have been absolutely fantastic. Blind Rogue is a very useless character for a long time. FYI, it's got its advantages at some point, but we had to do some tweaking with some rules and stuff with that one, which we'll get to a house rules episode later on at a different time. And the half elf sorcerer, wow, just literally insanity, and it's so much fun. What kind of questions would you ask? So you just brought up the questions aspect from your players. What kind of things are you going to ask them to try and fit that puzzle piece in?
Well, I think there's two pieces. So you hit on one of them sort of coincidentally, but as far as the world is concerned, the first question I always ask is hey, that's neat. So what made you think of rolling up that character? That sort of thing. If it's something that's sort of kind of off the wall, right? Get sort of their motivations, right, for why they might want to do that. And then I would start thinking okay, cool. I just maybe start jotting down a bullet point or two of how or why that character might have arrived to this place, or maybe they've been from here all along, but they're not really sure of their exact origins, right? And we start working that in the background. Maybe your background only dates back as far as you can remember. Before that time, there was something else that happened. Perhaps it was more globally a cataclysm, or perhaps microcosmically in this character's life, a traumatic event of some sort, right? And create that separation, that gap of before this campaign and then, during and after, right, for this character's legacy. The other piece of it is, you said a blind rogue wouldn't necessarily be so useful. To me, it's all right, well, let's structure this in a way that it might be, right? That it could be. And I'm sure that you worked with that and that adaptive sort of rule set, but I'm sure that somebody has motivation for the sort of blind rogue from Daredevil, stuff like that, right? Yeah. There's that the blind martial artist / roguish sort of archetype has been around for a long, long time, right? Especially in some kind of kung fu type adventure stuff and all that sort of stuff, right? It's been around for a very long time. So
absolutely, yeah.
You can work with that. I think limiting perception to sight is there's a lot of ways to work around that. So.
Absolutely. All right. So aside from those, what we were just talking about with the unique out of left field characters and their storylines, how can we, so anyone who's run a published game has had their experience, their players going down some random rabbit hole. And you as the GM, like I said, Johnson McJohnson doesn't want to go on adventuring, but other than breaking the fourth wall, how do we kind of get our players when they hook up with that random NPC and they just want to go and hang out with Johnson? How do we get them back on the main plot without breaking that fourth wall?
Yeah, so I think that's reasonable. This happens to all of us at certain times. Sometimes you've actually created unknowingly, unwittingly, an NPC that's really attractive to your characters, your players' characters, and they want sort of more of this particular NPC. So at that point, it's sort of your job as a GM to inject that NPC with more story knowledge than perhaps they may have had before. You only intended to give them the 3 throwaway NPC lines that I can just continue like video game style hitting next, right? Beating through. And they only say the same 3 things over and over again. Well, it turns out now that we need to get to a new chapter where they have more to say, right? So you can use those NPCs as great vehicles for structure and adding sort of affect and attention back to the main story arc. For instance, like give them a couple of bullet points that maybe no other NPC would know. And because the party has developed such a great rapport with this particular character, now they're willing to dispense this wisdom with them, right? Maybe feed a plot hook back into the story that gets them back into the main arc and on track. That way, it's you're not really railroading them as much as you are making a meaningful suggestion about maybe why, where they should be, according to an NPC they have already built trust with.
For sure. I like that. I like that a lot. So with our... I feel like we've all had a situation in life where either at the game table or in real life where someone in a group while you're trying to work on a project is just is dictatorial, becomes the dictator of the entire group. What are some ways that we can fix that? Because it's annoying in the real world and you just kind of sometimes have to deal with that because of group dynamics at the workplace. But it becomes not fun for players around the table. So like, how do we deal with that without taking away the agency of both the player who is the dictator and our other players and like give them their agency back?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of ways you can handle this, I think. First of all, my golden rule regarding this entire discussion is unless they asked for suggestions, then like, probably keep them to a minimum, right? Mm-hmm. For other players around the team. Like, unless they said, hey guys, what should I do? Right. Then constantly feeding them in what they should do is really, like you said, taking away their agency, their control. It's sort of their experience that's going to be compromised. So I've handled this in a couple of ways in the past. Number one, there's a really soft and subtle way you can do this, and you have to be really creative with the way you do it. And I will be honest, I think it takes a little bit of experience and having done it a couple of times to pull it off right. But basically, you give that player's character, the one that feels like their agency is getting taken away, or perhaps a handful of players, right? You give them some limelight moments. You give them moments that only their character are meant to do. Right. It's their skill set. It's what they're adept and proficient within that can accomplish this particular thing. That way, that other person at the table doesn't really get as much input. Right. They can't make as many suggestions. Now, if they still continue to try to dominate even a situation that is clearly only intended for this particular person to solve, then at that point, I think you just have that out of game conversation. Right. You just say, hey, really want to let the other players make their own decisions. And if at this point they solicit you for advice or we have a discussion, right, we break character and we want to talk out a game for a few minutes, then that's totally fine, right? That's cool. But I just want to be sure everybody's getting their fair chance to play and provide their own input, right? And I think it's a harmless conversation. Again, as I always say, if you can't have those types of really quick 5 to 10 minute conversations with a player outside of the table, then they might not be the right person to be gaming with.
Right. I agree. And I feel like it's that there's a small area where we get those players who are like this outside of a personality trait that individual has. You have new players who that are generally more shy. So they keep quiet and they're still trying to learn their stuff. And then you have experienced players who want to let everyone have played this and they want everyone to have their opportunity to shine, and they take their chances and they enjoy that greatly and then lift others up. But there's a small window, I think, right in the middle there, whereas a player is trying to unintentionally, probably for the most part, flex that they know what they're doing and they are confident in their stuff, and so they want to make the directions and push that out. So I think it's I feel like it's a part of growing in the game and how you play. And it's the same. It's the same for GMs, in my opinion. Like you've got the new GM who kind of lets players railroad and kind of make up whatever they want to do. And then you have the experienced GM that like, much like when you and I have played, you're just like, hey guys, we'll figure it out. Let's just roll with it. I am not to that level where I'm just like, oh, we'll figure it out. Like I am closer to the newer end where I'm like, let's follow this really clean path that I've shaped out for you so that I don't have to make things up the whole night. But I think it's that middle road where we get the most amount of this, and most players I think can like grow out of that. But I'm not. That's my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest with you. There is, I think, to your point, players can certainly sense that experience level of a DM, and you'll find less of that sort of cross chatter and rules lawyering and taking away player agency and trying to make decisions, unilaterally for the party or forcing your decisions on others. You find less and less of that the more that you set up great games, truthfully, right? Because there's sort of this expectation at this point of like, hey, we don't have to play together. Ultimately, if this is something that's causing a problem at the table, then we don't have to play together, right? I can move to a different party. You can go find a different group as well. So you get less of that sort of four coworkers get around the table. Maybe one's played a lot more than the others. And then here you go. Right now, there's this instant dynamic of control that's put in place, that sort of thing. So,
especially if you're playing with your direct supervisor, that could get real awkward. If your middle management's like, okay, I need you to come in on Saturday. And you're like, hey, I thought we were going to play Friday night. Anyway, Office Space reference there.
Office Space DM.
So this is something I've had issues with in the past at different points in time, and I'm sure that you've had it and our listeners have it. And our adventurers have been slogging through countless dungeons. It feels like Groundhog's Day every time we sit at the table. Wake up from long rest, roll initiative, fight some bads, loot body, move to next room, repeat. What's some things that we can do to like put a shot of life or kind of break that vicious cycle of wake up, kill stuff, go back to bed, wake up, kill stuff, go back to bed?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but I do want to preface it by saying, like, if that's your game style, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, right?
Absolutely,
I think,
of course.
Like D&D definitely, its roots and some of the games that I love most are a lot of that. Like, I love good old fashioned, like, talk to the town and get to the dungeon, I love that. I actually really enjoy that. But I think more to your point, you're saying, if you have a party that's more interested in doing these other things kind of within this universe, and they feel like they're it's really formulaic to the point of it's becoming boring, right? The game is not much more than a game, right? We're rolling dice, killing stuff, rolling dice, killing stuff, rolling dice, killing stuff. A lot of hack and slash and whatnot. I think I early on had this problem a lot of very much recipe, like it needs to be these three things to be a successful game, and that's a lot of how my games felt. Certainly run a lot of dungeon crawl stuff for convention style, but when it comes to my campaigns, if I feel like we're getting into a place at all that feels stagnant, whether it be in this format or another form altogether, typically I'll just kind of think about the something happens type of experience, right? Like something happens, and it could be something minor or environmental from like a random table, for instance, from the DMG or a supplemental guide, or it could be something bigger. Something happens like, holy cow, like, the Greenspire Castle in this large metropolitan settlement that the party has stumbled upon in their travels and the trailways of the Eastern Pass has just been struck with a cosmic meteorite,
right?
And and it bursts into this sort of magical flame, right? And townspeople are fleeing everywhere, and it's like, okay, so probably a couple of things have happened that caused this event, and a couple of things will happen as an effect of this event. Let's go investigate and explore this. I bet you we just got 4 sessions out of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So something happens, could be really small, it could be really, really large, like I just described. You can inject that shot of life, as you said, into your campaign by thinking about events that would really change the way that the players' characters feel, what would motivate them, what they would have intrigue about to go further investigate. Are there sort of these elements of good versus evil? Or is this, if you find that, hey, there's now a huge big bad that's put into place that caused this, or maybe it was some type of natural/supernatural event. And there's a whole sort of, mythos around investigating that issue, as well as conducting some diplomatic efforts and some aid efforts for the town, right? That could be a cool, session or two of just like, hey, this is a brand new settlement. Now we're going to learn this place. We're going to learn about the people, about their culture, but we're also at the same time going to jump in and just lend a helping hand. And all the while, we're building up now, sort of these small blocks to get to a larger point where we're going to resolve a conflict.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, while you were talking, I was struck. I had an idea. Like, we can look to the past. So when Haley first saw Haley's Comet, like, they thought it was an idea from the gods, or it was a symbol. Those kind of things can spark your inspiration, and it's interesting that you said meteorite, because as soon as you talked about big things, I was like, oh yeah, like a big giant meteor hitting in the middle of nowhere near where you are, and what comes from that. So it's really like we're on the same page there with that one. It's pretty we're synced up there.
Whether we knew it or not, Alex.
Yeah, right, for sure.
It's the beauty of doing this show.
So I think that cool thing is with that, like, I like that you can take random things like random tables, and the DMG's got that, and the plethora of tables that have been published and unpublished for that matter. Roll some dice and just be like, oh, insert meteor, Greenspire Castle, and monsters. Done. And like you said, you've got 3 or 4 sessions right there to kind of figure out what's going on that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Flump and Fungi, we are running. We are off and running on this adventure. 10 episodes in the books for RealmCast, and this journey is just beginning. Join us here next time as we discuss more of your favorite tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, I'd like to say, Alex, it's been a pleasure thus far doing this with you. For those of you at home that didn't know, Alex is a good buddy down here in the DC area. We started playing D&D together over this past year. And he's just been an awesome advocate for the company, a good friend and supporter. And he and I talked several months ago before Mountain Realm really got kicked off about doing a podcast. And I figured, great, we had all this kind of content to work together on. And we started doing this sort of side quest series as a part of RealmCast. And I figured this is a great way for Alex and I to do one sort of set of content. And then the RealmCast stuff could be kind of interview style and personality stuff. And I really think that's silly. I want more of Alex around. Alex has agreed to come on full time, so you'll be hearing him almost on an every week basis at this point moving forward. We'll still do little side quest series here and there when we have multiple sort of day episodes, right? Part 1, part 2, part 3 kind of stuff. But Alex will be jumping into the interviews with guests and panel stuff. You'll see more of him on the Twitch channel as well. So we're super excited to welcome him into the company. So thank you all
Bill.
so much.
I'm really glad to be a huge part of it.
Oh, of course. Yes, of course. Absolutely. This is just really, really exciting for us. So thank you all so much, as always, for checking this stuff out. Go to MightyRealmGames.com for all of the helpful links, including our very first Kickstarter for our original D&D module, available for OSR and 5e systems. It's called Clock Strike Zero. The Kickstarter is live right now as you hear this episode. As I record this episode today, we are over 70%. I'm hoping that it's well over that by the time you click that button and check out the page. So until next time, happy gaming.